Hi there. BattleTech's line of sight system and what sort of bonuses you get when you fire through different terrain isn't the most simple thing in the world. And I've seen even some experts who've been playing this game for a long time playing some of these things wrong. Let's talk about these rules a little bit because I think some of them need a bit of clarification, and maybe this video will be of help, especially to newer players who might struggle with how the system works. It's pretty simple when you understand these two rules in particular. The two bits of text that really explain a lot of this, if you really understand it, are these ones. These are from Total Warfare, from page 100. Terrain along the line of sight between two units intervenes if the level of the terrain or feature is equal to or higher than the level of both units, or the terrain or feature is adjacent to the attacker and equal to or higher than the attacker's level, or the terrain or feature is adjacent to the target and equal to or higher than the target's level. A very important word here is adjacent. The adjacent hex matters a lot. We'll talk about that in our examples here. The other rule that we're most interested in here is partial cover, and here's the part a lot of people miss. From page 102 in Total Warfare. The firing unit must also have an LOS level equal to or lower than the defending unit's line of sight level in order for the target to receive partial cover. In other words, check this out. An attacker firing downhill, regardless of how many hexes lie between attacker and target, negates its target's partial cover. If you're higher up, your enemy doesn't get partial cover. Of course, there is an exception to the rule that I'm not going to cover here because it's kind of simple to understand really, and it's partial cover from being in water or occupying a building. But that's not very interesting because you basically always get those bonuses, basically. Let's get into my examples. Here we have our two opposing mechs, a Vindicator and an Adder. And remember, all mechs, like all normal mechs, are level 2 in height, which is very important for all kinds of line of sight things here. Here we have them, just nothing between them, no modifiers at all. If you plop down a hill, a level 1 hill between them, nothing changes actually, because it's not high enough to intervene. Or it's not adjacent to a mech. Now it is, and the Vindicator gets partial cover from the Adder's attacks. The Adder's level is equal to the Vindicator, so it can only see like half of the Vindicator here. In this situation, of course, we move the Adder closer. It's also now adjacent to the hill, so it also has partial cover. Both of these mechs have partial cover to each other right now. Where people get confused a little bit is this one, this situation. The Adder is now one level higher than the Vindicator, and being on higher ground, shooting downhill negates partial cover. The Vindicator does not have partial cover in this situation. And it doesn't really matter how high the Adder is. It is higher, so the Vindicator doesn't have partial cover. Simple as that. In this situation, the Vindicator does get partial cover again, because now it is higher than the Adder. The Adder is lower. So again, the Adder can only see half of the Vindicator. The Vindicator does have partial cover. This picture is basically the same as the first partial cover situation. Just imagine they're both standing on level 0, really. And again, this is a situation where the Adder is higher up, so the Vindicator doesn't get partial cover in this situation. We can get a little bit more complex with our partial cover situation happening here. And in this situation, the Vindicator does not have partial cover because the Adder is shooting downhill, but the Adder does because it is higher up and it's behind a level of hills that's blocking half of it. Let's get into dead zones now. A dead zone is this situation. There is no line of sight because there is an intervening hill of equal level between these two mechs. Neither can see each other. Where people get a little bit confused again is this situation. The Vindicator is still in a dead zone because the level 2 hill is adjacent to the Vindicator, so the Adder can't see it even though it's a little bit higher up. Remember, earlier I told you that partial cover is negated if you're on like higher ground, but that is not the case for dead zones. This also doesn't help the adder. It still can't see the vindicator. And of course the vindicator also can't see the adder. If one unit has line of sight to another, then the other unit also has line of sight to the other. Again, it doesn't matter how high the adder goes, it still just doesn't have line of sight to the vindicator. Now let's go for a couple of more situations here. In this situation, both have full line of sight, no problem. The adder's point of view is level 3, and the intervening hill, level 2 hill, is not adjacent to the vindicator, so no problem. 0 modifiers. Same sort of situation actually. This is actually the exact same as before. As well as this one. It's the same thing. No problem. Some of it might seem a little bit counterintuitive, maybe, but the really important word here is the adjacent hex. This big hill is not adjacent to the vindicator, so no problem. They can see each other just fine. Of course, if you have units that are of different levels, like a prone mech, which is a level 1 unit, the dead zone is different. In this situation, the vindicator is lying behind the hill and is level 1, so it is in a dead zone for the adder. There's no line of sight. And again, it doesn't really matter how high the adder gets in this situation, it can't see the vindicator, it is in the dead zone. Same here. Of course, this also applies to other units that are like level 1 in height, for example, vehicles and infantry. Same thing here. The partisan is in a dead zone. It's still in a dead zone. Finally, let's talk about some woods, because there's also some misconceptions about how woods work when we're talking about line of sight and if the woods give you bonuses or not. Something I didn't take any pictures of is if you have like 3 points of woods between 2 units, that's going to block line of sight entirely. You know, 3 light woods, 3 hexes of light woods, or 2 hexes of heavy woods, or 1 hex of light woods and 1 hex of heavy wood, that's going to block your line of sight entirely. And it's also important to remember that if a hex of woods does give a modifier to one mech, it's also going to give it to the other one. So here we have a normal situation, 1 hex of woods between these 2 mechs. The woods, of course, are level 2, like the mechs are, so both get a +1. In this situation, the adder is higher up, but so are the woods, so the adder can still see the vindicator, but the woods are in the way. It's basically the same as the previous one. Of course, if we have the woods right next to the vindicator, no problem, both get a +1. Now again, if you're thinking about how partial cover works, you might think that if you get the adder higher, the woods might not interfere anymore. But again, this is the adjacent hex for the vindicator, where the woods are in, so it does get the bonus. And of course, if the vindicator shoots back, the adder also gets the same bonus. And again, it doesn't really matter how high the adder gets, because the woods are in the adjacent hex. So it always gets the bonus because it's in the adjacent hex. It doesn't matter how high up the adder is. Now, if this happens, the woods do not interfere actually. The adder's level is higher than the woods level, and the vindicator is not covered by the woods. So there's no modifiers. Perfect line of sight. Same here. No intervening woods. The adder's level is higher than the woods level. No problem. It can see over the woods. Same here. No change. Of course, it doesn't really matter how high the woods are if they are in the adjacent hex. And if the woods level is the same as the attacker's level, it's going to be intervening. So the vindicator does get the woods bonus. Same here. And same here. So there you go, a whole bunch of situations about line of sight and cover and modifiers. I hope that made this bit of rules a little bit clearer and a little bit more understandable, especially for a new player, because I think this thing is pretty complicated to grasp among all the other systems you're playing with in BattleTech. If you understand these 2 rules, that the adjacent hex matters a lot, and also that partial cover is simply negated if you're firing from higher up. You're going to be playing these situations in a more efficient manner. I hope that helped. I hope I didn't make any mistakes. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.